Dear colleagues, we resume our working day, and now we will have a press briefing by Mr. Antoine Arzhakovskyi, French historian, who will present his book, Discord Between Ukraine and Russia, How to Get Out of Crisis, who will suggest some solutions to the situations where we have found out. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here. I would like to welcome Ukraine Crisis Media Center for everything that it has been doing, and especially I'm grateful to Tatiana. I'm happy to present to you my book, Discord Between Ukraine and Russia, which was presented on the framework of book Arsenal this year in Ukraine. It's translation of the book which I wrote last year, which was published in June 2014 in French, and later on it was translated into English and Russian, where you can find in the internet, and in Ukrainian you can see it published by Vivat Publishing House. From the very beginning, I wanted to write a political book, and after having spent several years in Russia, I spent 6 years in Russia as director of the Economic College, and then I spent 6 years in Moscow and worked for Ukrainian Catholic University, and during that long period of time, I understood that it was not enough to work just on cultural issues, civilizational issues, and I understood that we should deal more with ecumenical problems, and that's why back in 2012, I held several interviews with Arseny Yatsenyuk, with the Front of Changes people, and later on, during the Revolution of Dignity, I met with different people, including Minister of Education, Mr. Sergei Kvit. During that meetings, I got information for French journalists, and these interviews enabled me to answer their questions, what was going on in Ukraine. Of course, you know that Russian propaganda is strong, and French intellectuals and French politicians, they watch these programs, and they listen to this information. That's why I've written this book about the events from events between November 2013 till mid-2014, and the summary of this book was written in January 2015, and in that book I tried to understand what was going on between Ukraine and Russia, and I set a parallel with the relations between Germany and France. Both of those countries saw their nationalities as the only inheritance of the Roman Empire, and this is the case with Ukraine and Russia. Karamzin tried to show that Russia was the only follower of the ancient Rus, while Grushevsky believed that only Ukraine was the predecessor of the ancient Rus, and in order to criticize all the doctrines, we should apply truly historical approach and explain that historiography is dangerous. And in my book, I criticize Samuel Huntington, the Harvard professor who wishes to explain that Ukraine should be divided into two parts because the Western Ukraine is closely related with Catholicism, while Eastern Ukraine is closely related to the Eastern Orthodoxy, and the main message by Huntington is that Ukraine should be divided. In my book, I explain that it won't be sufficient to divide Ukraine, and I demonstrate how Ukraine gradually shapes itself, including in 1920s, 1990s, and now it manifested itself as the bilingual state and as ecumenical state. There is a close relation of the ecumenical memory about events of the 17th, 18th century, which Greek Catholic Church, a good example of ecumenical church, which is unique in the world. And my main message is that the nation and the state is quite difficult. It is not like the French, it is not like the Russians. And when we come to this understanding that it is multilingual, multi-religious, ecumenical nation, we immediately understand that we should not look at the ancient truths as an inclusive heritage, as an exclusive Ukrainian heritage on the one hand. On the other hand, I provide some comments how we can find the solution to the current unilateral approach. And now questions.
I mean, the interest your book, it's not just an attempt to perceive or to contemplate what's going on, not from point of view of history, but there is an attempt to tell us what we have to do. So maybe you could briefly, in a few words, say, do you have any scenario for Ukraine, for Europe, for Russia? So just in a couple of words, what would be the way out of this crisis according to your opinion? Thank you, Tatiana. If in a few words, there is a way out of this situation, and we are talking about different approaches. We are talking about France, Germany, United States, Russia, and Ukraine. As regards Russia, it seems to me that Russia must go through the evolution which France went through in 1960s. General de Gaulle, who after the World War II was persuaded that France was an empire and that the French language, whenever and wherever in the world they speak French, and France has to protect this person now. Then in 1958 he went to Algeria, and he came to understand that indeed the times or the era of empires ceased to exist, and he suggested such a term as decolonization, and that what happened in the 1960s. The whole Africa became liberated. This did not mean the end of the influence of France. No, on the contrary, it made a big love. France has equality, freedom, fraternity, and and the Francophonie organization is rather a big one the world over. Russia must do the same. Russia must consider themselves as empire now, and the Crimea as a colony. I've been writing about that for quite a lot, and my Now, my ancestors used to live in the Crimea. They were Russian, ethnic Russians, but they did a lot about it. But they have, I mean, the Russians must understand that Crimea is a colony. This is number one. As for the France, Germany, United States, sure, the top priority today is to provide support in terms of economy or finance Ukraine. I mean, support Ukraine, and Ukraine has to take care of the inevitable reforms for the next 2 or 3 years and keep an attentive eye over this process to avoid corruption schemes. We are talking about $50 billion and Leaks is talking about $500 billion. But I don't know who is right, who is not, but it should be a serious support. And of course, we have to preserve the independence of Ukraine. If we agree that there is a warfare, and if France signed in let's say in Budapest in 1954, and they committed to undertook the commitment sovereignty of Ukraine, so France has to support Ukraine. Providing the defense weapons, the same holds for the rest of Europe, I mean European countries and Western countries, and they have to continue diplomatic negotiations with Russia and try to explain that France as part of Europe is not against Russia. We want to have the big Europe. Indeed, we lost on our way, especially of the Georgian War or the war in Georgia. That was a huge project between Gorbachev and Mitterrand to create a big Europe. But as regards Ukraine, I believe today is very important that the people should continue to support the government or the leaders, both Petro Poroshenko and Arseniy Yatsenyuk. This is a very difficult period in your history, but the government has to work together with civil society, with Ukrainian society. I do support all those draft laws on April 9, decommunization, etc. But there must be a discussion. You have to discuss the issue of constitution with the people, because the Orange Revolution failed not because Yushchenko was a bad person or Tymoshenko was a bad politician, but because the constitution was, it's really vaguely described in the constitution what the president should be, what the Rada or the council minister should be. There are some draft changes to be on modifications to be introduced into the constitution of Ukraine. The Council of Europe received those proposals, and the Venetian Commission came up with their remarks and comments. In the same, we can talk about the judicial system, but in Ukraine they seem to talk just a bit about that. But this is critically important, very important. So I believe on the one hand, Ukrainians, we are raptures and we are really inspired by what's going on here, because Ukraine is now defending the whole of European civilization. But on the other hand, it's clear that the situation is really fragile, and the government, it seems to me, must work much more with the Ukrainian public at large. And the last thing, and it's only too well, Tatiana, Ukraine has to defend or to protect itself at the international level. And we in France, Nicolas Sarkozy, all the way up to Marie Le Pen, we have only the information, we draw the information from the satellite news from Russia. That's why Mélenchon, one of the major parties in France, they do not even know who Nemtsov is or was. And Nicolas Sarkozy believes that if the Crimean population decided to access to Russia or become part of Russia, so what is the problem in that? They really believe in that kind of referendum they had, because nobody on the part of Ukraine cannot seriously voice their opinion against that. Poroshenko was yesterday in Paris, and I believe this was the first interview given by Poroshenko to the national TV channel in France. Putin, back in June in 2014, he was on the first channel, TV channel, first radio broadcasting company 1 year back. Poroshenko has Italy, which is not most popular TV channel, and 1 year after the major events, and here you have a huge work to do, where the MFA, Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, Ukraine Today, all intellectuals of Ukraine have to pay much attention to this issue, because we are talking about the creation of a certain kind of mentality. Thanks a lot. Do we have any more questions to the speaker, esteemed colleagues? We know that a certain turn in Europe took place after the tragedy of the Malaysian flight being downed over the territory of the east of Ukraine, and the new attention shown to the process of the disintegration of the civil society in Russia after the political murder of Boris Nemtsov. So, can you say something about the changes, or let's say alteration of the public opinion in France? We know that there are some cases of that, despite all the difficulties, and there is a understanding of the complexity of the situation. And let's say the understanding of the strategy, because in the next decade, Europe and the whole Western world will willy-nilly have to think in a different way about their relations and relationship with Russia, and to recognize that the European affairs, not just in Ukraine. It is not Ukraine doesn't think only about its their own interests, but about the whole Europe. So how this opinion undergoes changes, alterations. Today, it's the question to you as the author of a wonderful book. Thank you. This will take a lot of time, because in Ukraine, in France, they do not teach Ukrainian language, the Ukrainian language. Maybe just in 2 or 3 universities or colleges. Whereas Russian language is taught everywhere. In Russian culture, you can come across let's say, the science of Russian culture anywhere in big or small city in France. And again, if you're talking about television and radio broadcasting companies or the mass media, the news, they carry the news from Russia, That's true that the tragedy of the Malaysian aircraft being downed, that was kind of a shock to our citizens. But I was surprised that Nalyvaichenko, when he was speaking in the summer last year and tried to explain what was the strategy pursued by Putin, in fact, for Nalyvaichenko, I don't know whether it's true or not, but if it's just counter-propaganda or not. But anyway, he is the head of the SBU of Ukraine. And he tried to explain that that was a plan, let's say, of the Kremlin to down the Russian Aeroflot flight, and then to say that those were Ukrainians who actually downed that aircraft. That's why the live news correspondents were on the spot just to immediately report what the cruel person and hideous persons are Ukrainians. But that was a mistake between Pervomaisk and confusion between Pervomaisk and Pervomaiskoye. That's why they downed a wrong plane. That was the explanation offered by the head of SBU, the Special Service of Ukraine, Secret Service of Ukraine. I think nobody actually came to know about that in France, because this is Nalyvaichenko, head of the SBU. And even there was no discussion on what grounds were, on what grounds Nalyvaichenko was based on his information. That's why nobody could convey that information. And that's why we asked today the French population what happened then. everybody will say, sure, that was a mistake. It cannot be so that Putin intentionally did that, because this is not beneficial to Russia, what's going on today in Ukraine, general, altogether. We are not talking only about the Malaysian flight, because Russia is a normal country, they want to develop their economy. That's what we think from point of view of rational thinking. And we do not understand that specifically that the country living through a crisis which is developing propaganda, they have an absolutely different mentality or way of thinking. On the contrary, they would like to deepen the crisis. They want everybody to pay more and more attention to the authorities and to the might of the Russian state. This is not a rational thinking, but this is a thinking governed by war, or let's say war-targeted thinking. So far, the French population is far away from that. The war is far away, and again we face the unemployment problem. And if we start to think, even in addition to that, that Russia is going to change the European order and to support Marine Le Pen, whatever it else, this will mean the end of the world, and we won't cope with that problem. So it's better to think that Russia is a normal country, and that, of course, Putin is a very strange president. But speaking in principle, this is what it is. When we were with Tatiana polling of the public opinion, I mean, which actually showed that the French population understand or realize that Russia is responsible for the Russian-Ukrainian war. But anyway, we have to sell Mistral helicopter carriers to Russia, because we have to live and we have to sell our weapons. So that means that this is far away from that problem now, and people do not understand that this is something which has to do not only with the future of Ukraine, but, as you said, with the future of the whole of Europe.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do you have any further questions? Then I will probably ask the last very brief question. Yesterday, we had a briefing by Galia Ackerman, and one of her statements was there is a big threat that if Nicolas Sarkozy and his party will come to power during the next elections, this was turn French politics in anti-Ukrainian direction, because he is a known supporter of the Kremlin policy. Do you assess the chances that during next elections, UMP party and Nicolas Sarkozy will come to force? This won't be UNP party. Now they are called the Republicans, and they still need to vote for this name, but most probably there's a suggestion by Sarkozy will be supported. But as of the moment, we do not know who will be the Republican candidate for the elections. On one hand, this could be Nicolas Sarkozy or Alain Juppé. And Alain Juppé has already stated that even becoming the president, he won't sell Mistrals to Russia because he understands the danger. The next aspect is that in general, there will be members of there will be right-wing members of the Republican Party who will vote next year. And in this case, there are bigger chances that Nicolas Sarkozy will become the president, and nevertheless, the left wing is not ready to elect Marine Le Pen as the president of the country. So there are big chances that Sarkozy will become the president again. But I still believe that he is more complex politician. And by the way, I have sent him my book, and his right hand, he is my friend, and my friend informed me that Sarkozy has read my book. So today, Nicolas Sarkozy has to deliver a very very clear statement to prevent people from voting for socialists and for the right parties. On the other hand, clearly understands that Putin in 2015 differs much from Putin in 2008, with whom he laid down the agreement on Georgia, and the European community, thanks to Baltic states, thanks to Poland, more and more understands how dangerous Russia has become for the European community. Even the United Kingdom has realized this, and we have been thinking about this danger more and more, and we are planning in College of Bernardine a special conference that devoted to the creation of our own army, because we realize more and more that Russia is becoming the more and more dangerous, and that's why we believe that Ukraine should protect its reforms and defend its state, and that it should count on the European community and on France in that number. You have signed association agreement which will stimulate trade and economic development. As far as I know, on Monday and Tuesday there will be a meeting of the European community and of the donors who will contribute to reconstruction of Ukraine. As far as I know, that organization of this conference was not easy, and we hope that the Prime Minister and the President will be able to organize and hold such conferences rather efficiently. Unfortunately, what I have heard was the statement that unfortunately, due to insufficiently coordinated work of the branches inside Ukraine, then Europe sometimes is has some resolutions as to the assistance to Ukraine. Дякую дуже.